What's up everyone, DSP here, and I'm doing a completely impromptu video similarly to how I did earlier this week because the Ghostbusters movie box office results for the opening weekend are almost complete. We've got estimates in, and everyone's been talking about this controversial movie. Is it going to be a box office success or a box office bomb? I'm here to talk a little bit about that because we finally have concrete numbers, and also to discuss a little bit about the controversy because I never really just openly discussed it in a video specific to that subject, alright? Now, this video is completely impromptu. I'm squeezing it in right before my normal work session, so understand it's not going to have any editing or anything in it. I'm just going to be talking uncut on the fly just to get it out there for you, alright? So, months of controversy surrounding the Ghostbusters reboot. I don't want to go too long, but I want to give a little bit of history regarding Ghostbusters as a series and a franchise and why there's been so much hoopla about the movie. The original Ghostbusters movie from 1984 was a surprise success. Yes, it had a lot of talent involved, with Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray, and Harold Ramis all being either popular directors, writers, or comics of the time. Also producer Ivan Reitman, who was very well known for making, popular comedies at that time. But the movie really was successful, not only because it was a combination of special effects and talent, but because most of the movie, most people don't realize this, was done on the fly, impromptu. A lot of the dialogue in that movie was because those three main actors who had such good rapport as comedians, they, on the fly, made up half the movies. Like, you ever seen Whose Line Is It Anyway? Basically, Ghostbusters is Whose Line Is It Anyway, the movie. Half the stuff in that movie wasn't even in the script. They made it up on the fly and made an amazing comedic movie because of that. Now, the movie ended up becoming hugely successful, more so than they ever imagined. It ended up spawning entire franchises. It had a sequel, it had a cartoon series, it had merchandise. Universal Studios theme park had a big thing about it, and a stage show about it. It ended up going crazy popular in the 1980s, alright? Since then, we haven't heard anything about the Ghostbusters. And a lot of people have said, will there be another movie? Will there be Ghostbusters 3? All these rumors, unfortunately, with the passing of Harold Ramis recently, that kind of all just went by the wayside. But then we heard that there was going to be a reboot made. And everyone's like, I don't know about these reboots. Sometimes these reboots aren't what they're cracked up to be. And a lot of these reboots that have been made recently just seem to be more like cash-ins based off the name of the movie rather than actually being a valid movie or something that stands alone on its own talent and merits. So then as we got more information about this reboot, and we found out, it's going to have an all-female cast, while the original Ghostbusters movie had an all-male cast, and it's going to have such popular actresses such as Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy, these actresses who've been on SNL and or are already popular in the comedic movie scene. Okay, and then of course there was these, these group of people who really are sexist. We can't have females in the roles of males, and that completely destroys the movie, and blah, blah, blah. And listen, I fully understand that there's going to be people who are huge, hardcore fans of the original Ghostbusters movie. I am too. I grew up with them, and they're actually, Ghostbusters 1 is my favorite comedy of all time. I'd actually say it kind of pairs up there with Animal House as my two favorite comedies of all time, and I could probably go back and forth and say each one is my favorite of all time. But just because the cast now is female instead of male doesn't mean it's bad. I say, well, let's see the movie. Let's hear some of the jokes. Let's see how they're going to have rapport. The story is good. Will they have that interaction, that unique kind of interaction that the original cast had in the original movie? And the bottom line is that's why a lot of people have been skeptical about this reboot, because the original Ghostbusters was kind of not intended to be like that. They had a script and they had all this stuff, but then these guys just got along so well and just interacted so well that half the movie was on the fly out of nowhere. And a lot of people say the original Ghostbusters movie was an anomaly that you can't recreate. So why fucking reboot it? Especially when the director of the new Ghostbusters, Paul Feig, and I don't know if it's Feig or Fig, I'll call him Fig for the purposes of this video, has already had many successful comedies with Melissa McCarthy, such as Bridesmaids, The Heat, and Spy. All three of those were original concepts, and they did very well. So why do you have to do a reboot all of a sudden, right? So, the months passed, the build-up for this movie, and really the giant controversy didn't erupt until the first trailers hit the internet for Ghostbusters. And the first trailers, I'm going to be honest with everyone, I was skeptical of seeing a Ghostbusters reboot, but I wasn't closed-minded. I said, I'll give it a chance. The original trailers that I saw for this movie were fucking terrible. The comedy they included was completely slapstick, but not the good kind of slapstick where maybe there's a little bit of it, like in the original Ghostbusters movie. I'm talking over the top, like a ghost vomits all over someone disgustingly, and then they make body humor jokes, or one of the girls gets possessed by a ghost, and now there's a huge slapstick comedy fight where they're punching each other and rolling on the floor, and one of them makes a comment, oh, that's gonna leave a mark. Yeah, that's the kind of comedy that I want to pay $15 to $20 for when I go to the theater. Something that I heard like on a cartoon show that I watched when I was 5 years old. That's what I want to go see in the new Ghostbusters reboot. And I think that's kind of one of the real diversive things about this movie. The original Ghostbusters movies were for an adult audience. The comedy was, so there was sexual humor, there was adult style humor, there was sarcastic humor. And so you could go and see it and enjoy it if you were a kid because, oh, there's ghosts and there's funny stuff. Or you could enjoy it if you were an adult. This movie just seems like it's not enjoyable, at least from the trailers, unless you're a kid because the humor isn't funny. This is like schoolyard stuff that anyone above a 5th grade level wouldn't enjoy, all right? So as soon as people started criticizing the trailers, that was it. Now you got this apologist SJW community. How dare you dislike the new Ghostbusters reboot? If you don't like it, you're a sexist, because it's not that you don't like the humor of the movie, or you don't like the idea of a reboot capitalizing off the name of a franchise that was kind of an anomaly in itself, and there's no way they could ever reproduce that perfect storm of success. No, it's because you're a sexist, and you don't want to see females in the main roles of a big budget major motion picture. Fuck you, and shame on you, and how dare you. And so really, the Ghostbusters campaign became a divisive campaign of, do you actually want to see this movie on its own merits, or are you a sexist pig, you know? Which makes no sense. You have the right to not like a movie based off of things you've seen of the movie and not be called a sexist. Now, I'm certainly not saying that no one who was against this movie was sexist. I'm sure there were. There's always going to be that group of people who are just so, oh, women aren't funny. I disagree. Women have potential to be pretty funny. The problem is, taking this one movie, this one franchise that was a kind of anomaly, a one-time thing, and trying to modernize it, and then when you see the trailers, they're not funny at all, and certainly aren't anywhere in the original style of humor of the original movie, you're gonna have problems, alright? So we had this huge kind of controversy surrounding this reboot for months and months and months. It even got to the point where the angry video game nerd, who's a huge fan of Ghostbusters, grew up with Ghostbusters, who's made multiple videos about Ghostbusters, who hasn't really been heard of in the mainstream in a long time, made a specific video about that he would not be reviewing the new Ghostbusters reboot movie simply because he saw the trailers, much like me, and didn't like them, and he really likes the originals, and he doesn't want to sour that or anything, and he knows that if he sees the reboot, he's probably not going to like it based on what he saw in the trailer, so he's just not going to see it or review it. He made that video as a response to his viewership, who've been asking him for months if he would see and review the movie, because he's also known as a filmmaker as well as a gamer. Guess what happened? The social justice media community singled out the angry video game nerd in his video. I saw major media articles, front page on the internet, saying the angry video game nerd is a sexist pig, and look at the kind of guy who refuses to see this new Ghostbusters reboot. This is the quintessential guy. Look at him. He looks nerdy, and he's got all this merch behind him. He must be a big loser, right? Now, little do they know, because they're complete idiots and they do no research, he's one of the most successful filmmakers on the internet. He's made a living doing films for over a decade, making his little videos and stuff about video games, and he makes a lot of money, and he has tons of appearances, and he's very well respected on the internet, and they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. They're a bunch of fucking idiots. But that's what I mean. That's what this whole movement of protectionist, apologist stuff around Ghostbusters has been. Attack anyone for any reason who doesn't like it, even if they have logic behind their reasoning, and call them a sexist. So finally, after all of this hoopla and stuff going on these past few months, the movie has released. How did it do? Well, right now it's actually Sunday, July 17th, so we've got our 3-day estimates in for opening weekend in the United States. It's being reported it's going to make anywhere between $40 to $50 million, and of course that could vary, but it's pretty much a fair estimate in the United States. So how does that fare? Well, first off, it needs to be said, Ghostbusters didn't even win the weekend in the United States. What? This big budget, highly advertised movie from Sony that's supposed to be the best fucking thing ever, female comics finally in a main role, it didn't win the weekend? Well, what did? The Secret Life of Pets completely blew it away. And The Secret Life of Pets released last weekend. So a movie in its second week just beat out the premiere of Ghostbusters in the United States domestic box office. That says something, okay? Now, understand that just because the movie only made 40 to 50 million, all right, doesn't mean that it's a bomb. Let me explain. The budget of this movie was around $140 million. Typically, Paul Feig, when he makes a movie, his budgets are around 40 to 50 million. All right. So if this were a standard Paul Feig movie making 40 to 50 million, it probably would have been his most successful movie ever. In fact, just by the numbers, it is his most successful movie ever when it comes to domestic box office for the first weekend. The problem is he spent 3 times as much on the budget for this movie as he normally does because of the special effects and all of that shit. So now he's in a pickle because even though he dominated his old record, he didn't nearly make enough money to cover the movie. So what he needs to rely on now is international audiences because the movie will premiere internationally later on in the next couple of weeks usually. And it needs to be said that international markets in the modern era are actually much more important now than ever before. In fact, some movies that actually have tanked in the United States recently, including the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Michael Bay movies that are terrible pieces of crap. I saw the first one. I fucking thought it was one of the worst movies I've ever seen. It made tons of profit because internationally, the movie did well. I don't know why. Maybe they don't understand the language or some shit, although I think they translate it or dub it. Those movies were terrible, but internationally people love that shit. Shovel that CGI shit down my fucking throat for whatever reason. I hate it. Apparently people outside the United States love it. I don't know why. Just recently, Warcraft. This was a movie that everyone was on the fence. Could a big budget video game movie make it in Hollywood? The answer domestically, no. The movie tanked in the United States, but guess what? It made over $200 million in China alone. So it actually made tons of profit because internationally the release made tons of money, but here it made nothing. So with Ghostbusters, there's still potential that even though the movie only made up 1/3 of its production budget domestically opening weekend, that over the next few weeks, carryover and also being now internationally released, it could make a lot more money and it could end up being a success. But there's one big difference between Ghostbusters and those other movies I just mentioned. Ghostbusters will not be opening in China. That one huge international market, it's considered the #2 movie market in the world, the one that everyone's been trying to get for the past few years. China decided, we're not going to run Ghostbusters. Now, why is that? Is it because they're sexist pigs? I don't know, maybe. But their reasoning was that they thought the movie wouldn't really make much sense. They said, first of all, no one here even watched or remembers the original Ghostbusters movie, so you made a reboot that has to do with it, and no one here even knows what the first two are, so no one here is going to go to the movies based off the fact that this is a reboot movie. And traditionally in China, supposedly, movies that have to do with the supernatural or ghosts or that kind of stuff are banned. Like, they're actually outright banned. Now, movie makers have gotten around this previously by making titles such as, instead of Ghostbusters, it would be Super Action Team of Capturing the Abnormal or something like that. I'm not even kidding. That's like the names that they come up with to get around the regulations in China. But apparently, even with that, they did rename the movie and everything. China says, no, we're not going to have this in our country. We don't think there'll be any interest. So, guess what? That huge market that movies have literally relied on China to save their asses when they didn't do good domestically, Ghostbusters isn't getting it. So now it's got to rely on Europe and Australia and those kind of markets. I don't know. Realistically, do you see it making over $100 million in those international markets to make up its production budget? I don't know. It very well could. This is all speculation. It's still Sunday, and we still got more numbers to pull in and all of that. But based off of all the estimates and everything that we've seen, chances are Ghostbusters is not going to be a hit whatsoever. If anything, maybe it'll break even. It may even end up being a potential flop, okay? So now let's be real here, all right? I think that a lot of the bullshit around this movie needs to be called out upon. First of all, most of the people who've been defending this movie never have anything good to say about the movie. It's not like they're saying, well, the movie's great. Didn't you see the trailer and this hilarious line here or there? No. All the shit that people have been saying is, oh, you're a sexist if you don't want to see it. Well, that's not based on the merits of the movie. You know what I mean? And even the few people who've come out and defended the movie, who had apparently seen it before we had a chance to see it, were very questionable. For example, Dan Aykroyd, one of the original writers and actors in the Ghostbusters movies, came out and said, well, I saw the movie and I just want everyone to know it's better than the original Ghostbusters. What? Like, are you... It's just so disingenuous. It's not... You could tell that it's not a genuine thing that he said, unless he's getting senile. Let's face it, Dan Aykroyd's pretty up there in age right now. And listen, I respect the guy. I'm one of the biggest fans of Dan Aykroyd, but when I heard that, I was like, Dan, you're out of your mind. Everyone knows the original Ghostbusters was one of the anomalous, successful movies. How can you reproduce that formula? How could you say off the cuff that this movie is better than the originals, like, no one's gonna believe you. Anyone who's a fan of Dan Aykroyd didn't believe him when he said that. It just seemed like it was a paid product placement or advertisement. I think it actually hurt the campaign for Ghostbusters more than it actually helped it, because it was so out of place and just ridiculous. Obviously, if you make an American classic of anything, you're going to say that's the best, and a reboot isn't as good, or at least you can say it's good, but you're not going to say it's better than the original. It didn't make any sense. Now, admittedly, I didn't see the movie yet. Much like the Angry Video Game Nerd, I saw the trailers, I fucking hated them, and I have no desire to see this movie in theaters. It's too expensive. I may see the movie in a few months when it's on demand. You know, I'm not going to refuse to see this movie for my entire life. In fact, I would maybe like to see it as a frame of reference to compare it to the originals. But I'm not going to go to the movies and spend a ton of money to see a movie that doesn't interest me, right? It just doesn't look interesting to me based off the trailers. So I can't tell you what's actually in the movie that may have made people not go see it this weekend, all right? But from everyone who's seen it, I've heard a bunch of stuff on social media, people contacting me saying, I saw the movie. The humor isn't funny at all. It really is grade school level jokes that I guess they're trying to get, 5-year-olds to laugh at or whatever. There's nothing really in the movie for adults very much at all, besides maybe one or two things that are just way over the top and not funny. And, if you can believe it, the Ghostbusters reboot is incredibly sexist. Only not in the way that you think. Because all this cry of sexism, it's actually the opposite. It's sexist against men. Let's talk a little bit. The original Ghostbusters movies, there was sexism in them, but it was done for comedic purposes, and the people who were sexist were seen as villains. Peter Venkman, right, was incredibly sexist, but that's because he was trying to seduce the strong, independent woman, Dana Barrett, who was being haunted by ghosts. She was a musician. Later on, she was a successful painter and retoucher. She had her own career. She could afford these high-rise apartments in New York, so obviously she was wealthy. She was strong and independent. She very strongly resisted much of the advances of Peter Venkman and repeatedly, sarcastically called him out, even calling him, I think you're like a game show host and stuff like that. It was funny because he was being sexist and misogynist to her, but she basically was destroying him on camera, and that was hilarious. Now, the other main female character in the Ghostbusters movies, Janine Melnitz, who was the, again, independent, very sarcastic. She always was going back and forth with the Ghostbusters. She wasn't taking any shit from them. So the women in the original Ghostbusters movies were actually strong, independent, and didn't put up with the sexism shit that the males threw at them. Compare that with this Ghostbusters reboot, where apparently all the male characters are actually either incredibly stupid dunces, basically just put on the screen to be pieces of meat, like Chris Hemsworth, who's supposed to be their assistant or secretary, literally does nothing intelligent. He acts like a dunce, and she just stands there and poses like a piece of meat for the women for the whole movie. Or, I guess the other men are supposed to be like all portrayed as evil or bad. So, what kind of a message does that say? You're actually doing worse in the reboot, right, when it comes to sexism, but this is, the people have been defending the movie, saying if you don't see the movie, you're sexist, and if you see the movie, you realize the movie is innately sexist anyway. I don't know. So, let's wrap this up, because I'm now going on rants and tangents. If anything, we may have learned two things from the performance of Ghostbusters in the domestic box office this weekend. The first is that, unlike the past, finally, these reboots may not fucking fly anymore, alright? For years, it's always been a thing in Hollywood, the reboot. And in fact, a lot of movies that maybe we remember from our childhood, we might not realize, were actually reboots. That they had been movies much earlier in Hollywood, and they just keep being remade and remade and remade, okay? But, it needs to be said, Hollywood's always had reboots as a thing, but recently, say the past 15 years, we've seen an over-fucking abundance of reboots that just aren't very quality. Right? And it seems like they're doing it more for this. Let's just throw a bunch of money and production budget and marketing into a shit movie that has a name everyone recognizes, so everyone will flock to the theaters and they'll all be disappointed, but who cares? We got your money, right? Making a film not only as a money-making venture, but also as a piece of art that you feel like you walked out of the theater, you got something out of it. Should be the goal of a filmmaker, not just the big payday, okay? Now, it was actually said by these SJW defendists, right, or apologists, during the build-up to Ghostbusters reboot, was that, well, why is it that with Ghostbusters, this reboot that has 4 women as the main characters, this is the one that everyone's up in arms about, but what about all those other reboots previously? No one was ever up in arms about those, so obviously it's only because people are sexist. No! It's because before now, we didn't have a collective voice to stand up against these reboots and say they suck. For example, how many horror movies have been redone recently? and all of that. And how many movies are being redone that we don't want to see redone? But before we had Twitter, before we had Facebook, before these were super popular, where could we vent our frustrations? It was all about who put production into the marketing, right? The marketing was what got these movies known and what made money in the box office, because there was a ton of money thrown into them to promote those movies. We, the individuals, didn't have a voice. Now with the internet and Twitter and Facebook and social media, we now have the voice to call bullshit on that. So I don't say no. Ghostbusters is not being called out as a bad reboot because it's for female leads. It's being called out as a bad reboot because it's the first time we've ever had the fucking means to collectively say, fuck you, Hollywood. Get some talent, get some fucking originality, and put out something that we actually want to see that's original and fun, rather than just riding off the coattails of the popularity of things from the past. Just because it has the name Ghostbusters doesn't mean that it's good and people are going to run to the theater to fucking see it. Maybe this is the tip of the iceberg that'll start pushing us in that direction, where these big reboots are going to go away and Hollywood will finally start to be original again. What a novel concept. But number two, and I think this is actually the biggest takeaway of the whole situation, after all the months that we had to sit here and put up with the stupid bullshit on the internet of these SJWs saying that we're all sexist because we don't like the look of the Ghostbusters reboot, guess what? All of that whining, all of the reviews that you read that are, oh, it's the best movie ever made, and all the articles about Angry Video Game Nerd being a sexist because he doesn't want to see them, they all amounted to nothing. You can flood the internet with your fucking bullshit, but if anything, this weekend domestically, American moviegoers proved that all your online bullshit amounts to nothing in the real fucking world. Really. Because if really it was this big of a deal, people would have been flooding in droves. We gotta support women in comedic roles, and that's what this is all about. Let's go see this great movie. No, that's not what happened, because people didn't buy into your bullshit. There may be a lot of you who are very vocal on the fucking internet, but all of your bullshit, we can see through it because we're intelligent humans. We're not just fucking sheep who buy all your stupid nonsense. So that's awesome. Even though we have to put up with the bullshit online, this is showing that we don't long-term have to see it have concrete effects in the real world. It didn't have any kind of a positive effect on Ghostbusters, and hopefully, I'm sure this shit will happen again in the future. If we can judge our judgments based off of logic, off of what we see in movie trailers, off of what we see, and make logical judgments based off of that, rather than just these kind of, sexist judgments, we can actually make a difference rather than just say, oh, well, that's it. If someone says that there's sexism or racism in something, I guess we just have to support it. Listen, I'm going to end the video like this. The bottom line is, on this planet, in America in particular, there's lots of injustice. There's people on the fucking streets who have no food and no house, and they're dying out there. There's entire races of people who are judged unfairly, who are being gunned down in the streets unfairly, who are basically just being mistreated because of the color of their fucking skin. Some people can't get jobs because of the color of their skin, or aren't even getting paid as much because of the color of their skin. Right now, there's an entire sex, women, who, yes, in some ways are being mistreated in certain ways. They don't get the same opportunities. Maybe they're not making as much as men. Of course, I'm not going to go into specifics of that because there's statistics either way. There's possibilities that there's injustices for huge groups of people. The Ghostbusters movie reboot was probably not the issue you needed to focus on if you're an SJW in the past few months. There's probably way more important and effective ways you could have spent your fucking time, but instead you wasted your time talking about a fucking movie that ultimately doesn't matter. It's a reboot, it's a fluff piece. No one's gonna give a shit about this movie in the long term. Sony wanted it to be a big flagship series, but guess what? The trailer sucked. That's what made this movie tank and not do well domestically. Not that there's 4 women, not the controversy, the fact that the movie looks terrible. Deal with it and move on to the real social justice issue you can do something good with and actually help by putting your efforts and attention towards, rather than focusing on a fucking movie, you idiots. It really irks me to see these people who have all this free time, right? To be on the internet constantly on social media and be complaining and big ad campaigns and front page media articles about the Angry Video Game Nerd. But where's the actual interest in things that they can make a difference in, that help and matter? There's just no helping illogical people. Alright, that is it for my take on this Ghostbusters reboot and how it's done this past weekend. I hope you enjoyed the vlog. Thanks for watching. See you later, everyone.